Yes, we can. Thank you.
Great. All right. Hi, everyone. I am Alexandra White. I am an investigator in the epidemiology branch at the NIEHS. And today I am excited to be here and to share some of the work that we've done in my research group on hair dye and hair straighteners in relation to women's cancer risk. So this figure shows the cancer incidence for women in the US, as well as cancer mortality rates in 2022. Today, the work I'm going to talk about focuses on breast, uterine, and ovarian cancer. And you can see here that breast is the most commonly diagnosed cancer among women in the US. Uterine cancer is the fourth most common cancer diagnosed. Ovarian is not as common as these other cancer types in terms of incidence, but it does contribute notably to cancer mortality, considering its lower incidence. And these three cancers together are considered hormone-sensitive cancers, meaning that they all depend on estrogen in order to develop and grow. And they, due to having the similar hormonal etiology, they have shared risk factors, for example, obesity and hormone therapy use. And due to this hormonal etiology, it's suspected that endocrine disrupting chemical exposures may be important for all three of these cancers. And hair products is a potential source of exposure to both carcinogens as well as endocrine disruptors. And this is particularly important because we know that hair dye and use of other hair products is extremely common. For example, hair dye, as well as products used to perm or produce body waves in hair, have been found to contain aromatic amines as one example of a chemical of concern. And aromatic amines have been shown to induce mammary tumors in rodents. And one study found that women who used hair dye were about 8 times more likely to have aromatic amine DNA adducts in their breast ductal epithelial cells. And this study is really important because it shows that the chemicals that are being put on our hair are permeating the scalp and entering the circulation and reaching tissues such as the breast. And also that these chemicals, some of them are able to bind to DNA, which is a carcinogenic event. Another group of hair products of concern include chemical straighteners or relaxers. These have been found to include a range of endocrine disrupting compounds, including phthalates, parabens, and metals. And certain formulations have been found to release formaldehyde, which is an established carcinogen. And it's important to note that chemical straighteners and relaxers are more commonly used by Black women compared to non-Hispanic white women. So previous epidemiologic research on hair products and cancer risk has been limited, with most research focusing on hair dye, but few studies have considered other hair products, including straighteners or relaxers. Studies have suggested a positive association between the use of straighteners and relaxers and breast cancer, but to the best of my knowledge, there have been no other epidemiologic studies of straighteners and relaxers in relation to other cancer types. So today I'm going to talk about a few of the studies that we've done focused on evaluating the association between the use of hair products and the risk of hormone-sensitive cancers, including breast, ovarian, and uterine within a prospective US cohort. So the study that I am going to talk about today is called the SISTER study. And this is a large prospective US-based cohort study of over 50,000 women who reside across the US. Women in the SISTER study were recruited between 2003 and 2009, at which point they were all breast cancer free, but they all have a sister, either half or full, who'd been previously diagnosed with breast cancer, making them eligible for the study. And so that puts all women in our study population at about a 2 times higher risk of developing breast cancer themselves. So this cohort is ongoing and is an active follow-up. And our participants complete annual health updates, which is a place for them to report any cancer diagnoses that have occurred, as well as more detailed follow-up surveys. Breast cancer, all of our cancer diagnoses are self-reported and confirmed by the medical record. So at the time that they enrolled in the study, the women had on average an age of 55 years. The cohort is 82% non-Hispanic white and 9% African American or Black. About a third reported a household income greater than $100,000 a year, and about half have a bachelor's degree or higher. So this is a slightly higher socioeconomic status cohort, although it's similar to other volunteer-based cohorts in the US. So as of our most recent data release, we have on average about 10 years of follow-up in the cohort. And during this time, over 4,000 breast cancer cases have been diagnosed, 378 uterine cancer cases, and 241 ovarian cancer cases. And so for all 50,000 women in the cohort, they completed a structured questionnaire on personal care product use. And so this is an example of one of the questions we asked. So for a section of the questionnaire, we focused on their exposures in the previous 12 months from enrollment. So the question asked, in the past 12 months, how frequently have you or someone else straightened or relaxed your hair or used hair pressing products? And these were the response options. For our statistical analysis, we dichotomized the frequency to less than 4 times per year, and as frequent being 4 or more times per year. And so similar versions of this question were asked for permanent hair dye, semi-permanent hair dye, temporary dyes, hair straighteners and relaxers, which is shown here, and hair permanents and body waves. So this figure shows the distribution of reporting permanent hair dye and straightener use at baseline. So you can see, and this is stratified, by non-Hispanic white and Black women. And so you can see that permanent hair dye use, which is the most common hair product reported, is slightly more common among non-Hispanic white women compared to Black women. And then, as we would expect, straightener use is much more common among Black women in our cohort. So I'm going to start by showing our results for these hair products assessed at baseline and breast cancer risk. Just to orient you to these figures, because you're going to see a lot of them that are similarly laid out. These show adjusted hazard ratios and 95% confidence intervals. So if the point estimate is above 1, it suggests a positive association. And the bars are the confidence intervals. So if those include 1, it indicates that this result was not statistically significant. So this figure shows the results for ever use of these hair products in relation to breast cancer risk over follow-up. And so we observed a slight increase in risk for reporting permanent hair dye use at baseline, but no association for semi-permanent or temporary dyes, and then an elevated but insignificant association for straightener use. Oh, sorry, my slides seem to have stalled here. Let's see. Oops, all right, sorry, here we go. So for the second figure here that popped up, we next considered frequency of use of these hair products. And so the purple triangle is less frequent use, and the blue circle is more frequent use. So you can see that considering frequency of use did not make a difference for permanent dyes. The association was similar for either less or more frequent use. We see still no association for semi-permanent dyes, but when we look for straighteners, we see that more frequent use of straighteners, which to remind you is defined as using it more than 4 or more times in the past year, was associated with about a 30% higher risk of breast cancer. So next we stratified these associations and looked at them among non-Hispanic white and Black women, given that we know that Black women are much more likely to be using the straighteners. And so for permanent dyes, we see that the association is stronger for Black women compared to non-Hispanic white women. But for straighteners, our point estimates are very similar across both groups. So for the second project, we focused on ovarian cancer risk. So these results show the same products in relation to ovarian cancer. And so you can see across a range of different types of hair products, including dyes, bleach, highlights, straighteners, and perms, we see no evidence of a higher risk for ever use of these products with ovarian cancer risk. Again, when we looked at these associations by frequency of use, we do see that there's no higher risk for permanent or semi-permanent dyes, but we see about 2 times higher risk for frequent use of straighteners for ovarian cancer risk. This shows the results for these hair products, ever use of these hair products, and ovarian cancer risk stratified by race. And we see that associations for both permanent dyes as well as straighteners remain very similar when stratifying by race. The last set of results I'm going to show you today look at these hair products in relation to uterine cancer risk. So this study is preliminary data and is currently under revision at the journal, but we see that ever use of permanent dyes or semi-permanent temporary dyes was not strongly associated with uterine cancer risk, but we do see that ever use of straighteners is again associated with uterine cancer risk. And that when we look at frequency of use, we see a dose response where the highest risk was observed among women who reported more frequent use of these straightening products. For uterine cancer risk, we stratified again by race, and you can see here we did not have enough Black women to estimate associations for permanent dyes, but for straighteners, we do see again a consistent association across both of these groups. So some summary of these findings, we found that permanent hair dye was associated with breast cancer risk, particularly in Black women, but although we did see a small increase in risk in non-Hispanic white women as well. But we saw no consistent associations for permanent hair dye or other types of dye with ovarian or uterine cancer risk. We found that frequent use of straighteners was associated with breast, ovarian, and uterine cancer risk in the sister study. For breast cancer, frequent straightener use was associated with about a 30% higher risk. And for ovarian and uterine, we saw that frequent straightener use doubled the risk of these cancers. Although our estimates of association tended to not vary when we stratified by race ethnicity, straighteners are much more commonly used by Black women, and so the higher prevalence of use in this population makes those results more relevant and impactful for those women. Some considerations, this was a prospective cohort, so that means that we were asking women about their exposures at baseline and then following them for cancer, so this would limit any recall bias. But although recall error is possible, we focused on recent exposure in the previous 12 months, which would hopefully minimize that. But we did not include data on exposure patterns across the life course, which are likely relevant for something like cancer, which has a long latent period. Sorry, looks like we're stalling out. Oh. Here we go. Okay, everything's just going to come up at once. So unfortunately, we don't have specific questions about what products they used. So we're unable to identify any specific constituents in these products that may contribute to risk. We assessed exposure at baseline in our study, which was in the early 2000s. So it's likely that products have changed over time. Although we have a cohort of over 50,000 women, we did have limited statistical power to consider differences by race ethnicity, and we were also unable to estimate effects for women of other racial ethnic groups, for which we had even smaller sample sizes. As you saw when we went over the questionnaire, our straightener use question also include a reference to pressing products, which was referring to using a flat iron to straighten hair rather than a chemical process, which really was our research question of interest. And so there might be some misclassification, which would likely attenuate our effect estimates towards the doll. And it's important to note that all women in our study do have a family history of breast cancer, putting them at a higher risk of developing breast cancer themselves and also ovarian cancer. So it might mean that our results and the magnitude of our estimates may not be generalizable to all women. So in conclusion, in this large prospective cohort of women in the United States, we observed a higher risk of breast, ovarian, and uterine cancer among women who reported frequent use of straighteners. Future studies are needed in large, diverse populations with greater representation of racial ethnic minority groups, as we know that product use varies by race ethnicity, and so we need to have better assessment of these different products and statistical power to consider how these may impact risk of cancer in these women. With that, I'd like to thank all of my collaborators across these projects, as well as the participants in the sister study cohort. And I'm looking forward to taking questions, and I have my email here as well.